Venice was never meant to exist. Raised on mud and salt water, with no land to farm, no mines to exploit, and no great army to defend it, the city defied every known rule of power. And yet, for more than 1,000 years, this fragile settlement became one of the richest, most stable, and most influential states in the world. This is the story of how a community born from fear turned the sea into its weapon, its lifeline, and its destiny. Hello and welcome to the Boring Library. There was nothing about this place that suggested endurance. A scattering of low islands, barely rising above the waterline, surrounded by mud, salt, and shifting tides, exposed to relentless wind and an unforgiving sea. There were no mountains to defend it, no fertile plains to feed it, no veins of metal beneath the ground to finance ambition. No great army stood ready behind walls of stone. Everything about the lagoon suggested impermanence. And yet, against every reasonable expectation, it endured. For nearly 1,000 years, this unlikely settlement grew into one of the wealthiest and most powerful states the world had ever known. A republic without kings, a city without land, an empire without borders on a map. From a foundation of mud and seawater, Venice rose to command trade routes that linked continents, shaping the flow of goods, wealth, and power between East and West. Its ascent was not the result of chance, nor of conquest by force of arms. It was the product of calculation, adaptability, and an extraordinary understanding of the sea. Ships became its roads. Contracts replaced crowns. Commerce became its language of power. Through maritime skill, political ingenuity, and relentless pragmatism, a community of merchants forged an empire that stretched far beyond the horizon. Yet, this was never only a story of triumph. It was also a story marked by tension, risk, and eventual decline. A slow, graceful fading rather than sudden collapse. A city that would spend centuries admired, envied, and imitated, long after its political dominance had begun to wane. But the origins of Venice were far humbler and far darker. Its story did not begin with ambition or grand design, but with flight. In the 5th century of the Christian era, the Western Roman Empire was breaking apart. Northern Italy, once prosperous and secure, was torn open by waves of invasion. Among the most feared were the Huns, who swept in from the east under their leader Attila, leaving burned cities and shattered communities behind them. Faced with destruction, the Roman inhabitants of the region known as the Veneti abandoned their homes and fled. They escaped to the one place their enemies could not easily follow. Beyond the mainland lay the Adriatic Lagoon, a vast and desolate expanse of shallow water, marshland, and unstable islands. It was harsh, uncomfortable, and unpredictable. This was no promised land, but it offered something the mainland no longer could: protection. Horsemen could not charge across its channels. Armies could not maneuver through its maze of water and mud. Confusion itself became a defense. Those who settled there were refugees, fishermen, salt workers, farmers, stripped of everything familiar. On narrow, muddy patches of ground, they began to piece together a new existence. Their community was no longer rooted in earth, but in water. No longer sustained by fields, but by tides and salt. Yet, a fundamental problem remained. Stone cities were not meant to stand on mud. The solution they devised was as audacious as it was effective. Thousands upon thousands of wooden piles were driven deep into the soft lagoon floor, forced downward until they reached a firm layer of compacted clay beneath the shifting sediment. Submerged and sealed from air, the timber hardened over time, forming a dense and resilient foundation. Above this hidden structure, thick wooden platforms were laid, and only then did stone walls, churches, and homes begin to rise. Venice was built upon an invisible forest, driven upside down into the earth. This environment shaped its people. Water dictated movement. Boats replaced carts. Canals replaced streets. Daily life demanded precision, patience, and adaptation. Survival depended on cooperation and practical thinking, not brute strength. Over generations, this struggle produced a society oriented entirely toward the sea, comfortable with uncertainty and skilled at turning limitation into advantage. The city that emerged from fear was never meant to remain a refuge. As isolated settlements merged into a single growing city, Venice found itself in a new position. Officially, it belonged to the distant Byzantine Empire. In practice, it governed itself. Autonomy had been earned quietly, through distance, necessity, and maritime strength. What the city now required was unity, but its people remembered the tyrants and warlords of the mainland all too well. They had fled one-man rule and had no desire to recreate it in the lagoon. Their greatest fear was not chaos, but concentration of power. Any leader strong enough to unite the city might also threaten to dominate it. From this fear emerged one of the most carefully engineered political systems in medieval history. They had escaped cities ruled by violent men, by warlords who seized power through force and ruled by fear. What they carried with them into the lagoon was not only the desire to survive, but a deep and lasting suspicion of concentrated authority. Above all else, they feared recreating the very system of single-man rule from which they had fled. Yet a city cannot exist without leadership. The challenge was clear: how to unite a growing community without allowing power to harden into tyranny. The solution they devised would become one of the most enduring political experiments in history. In the 8th century, Venice created the office of the Doge. The title was drawn from the Latin dux, meaning leader, and the distinction was intentional. The Doge was to guide the state, not rule it. He was to embody continuity, not domination. Chosen for life by the city's most powerful families, he was elevated by election rather than bloodline. He did not inherit power, and he could not pass it on. From the very beginning, the office was designed with limits. Real authority rested not in a single figure, but in the collective strength of the merchant elite. These families had built their fortunes on ships, contracts, and distant markets. Their wealth depended on stability, predictability, and trust in institutions rather than individuals. Their greatest fear was not external invasion, but internal usurpation. A doge who gathered too much influence could transform the republic into a dynasty, bending the machinery of commerce to serve personal ambition. To prevent this, Venice transformed governance into a carefully balanced mechanism. It called itself a republic, but it was never a democracy. Power was confined to a narrow class of noble families whose status was inseparable from trade. At the center of this system stood the Great Council, an assembly composed of the male members of Venice's ruling houses. This body was the ultimate source of legitimacy. From it flowed every other office of state. The Doge, though the most visible figure, was bound by law, ritual, and surveillance. Upon assuming office, he swore a detailed and restrictive oath that defined not only his powers, but his limitations. He could not appoint his successor. His sons were barred from holding public office during his lifetime. His correspondence was inspected before reaching him. Even movement was regulated. He could not leave the city without permission from the councils that surrounded him. Power was not trusted. It was contained. To guard against betrayal and internal collapse, Venice created one of the most feared institutions in European history, the Council of Ten. Small, secretive, and permanent, it functioned as the Republic's internal security apparatus. Its mandate was broad and uncompromising. Conspiracy, treason, corruption, nothing lay beyond its reach. Its presence was everywhere. Citizens were encouraged to report suspicious behavior anonymously, slipping accusations into stone letterboxes carved into the walls of public buildings. These openings, shaped like grimacing lion faces, became symbols of the state's vigilance. The Republic listened constantly, even to whispers. The result was a system built on contradiction. Venice was a state that prized order and continuity, yet was founded on deep institutional distrust. Authority existed, but only under relentless supervision. No individual was ever allowed to stand above the Republic itself. Remarkably, this worked. While much of Europe was consumed by dynastic conflict, succession crises, and feudal wars, Venice endured. Its political structure changed little over centuries. Governments fell and rose elsewhere, but in the lagoon, the machinery of state turned with measured consistency. This stability became Venice's greatest advantage. Freed from the chaos of internal power struggles, the Republic could focus its energy outward. Wealth accumulation became policy. Trade became strategy. The sea became destiny. In its earliest centuries, however, Venice was not yet fully sovereign. It existed beneath the shadow of the greatest Christian power of the age, the Eastern Roman Empire, known to history as Byzantium. Ruled from the dazzling and immensely wealthy city of Constantinople, this empire stretched across the eastern Mediterranean and beyond. Venice was, in theory, one of its distant provinces, a duchy on the edge of imperial control. In practice, it governed itself. This ambiguous relationship shaped the city's early identity. Venice stood at a crossroads between worlds, geographically Western, yet culturally oriented toward the East. It absorbed Byzantine influence in art, ritual, and political form. The golden mosaics that would later cover the interior of St. Mark's Basilica reflected this inheritance, crafted by Eastern masters or inspired by their traditions. This connection was not merely aesthetic, it was profoundly economic. Through its link to Constantinople, Venice gained privileged access to the most advanced markets and trade networks of the medieval world. Its merchants learned to navigate imperial politics with precision and restraint. Loyalty was offered when useful, withheld when costly. Its navy, growing steadily in strength and reputation, became an asset the empire could not ignore. Again and again, Byzantine emperors called upon Venetian ships to counter threats from Norman adventurers and Arab fleets. Venice answered, but never without compensation. Service was rendered not as duty, but as negotiation. Every alliance carried a price. The decisive turning point came in the year 1082. The Byzantine emperor, Alexios I, found himself under severe pressure. Faced with invasion and an urgent need of naval support, he turned to the one force capable of saving him at sea, the Venetian fleet. Venice agreed to provide that assistance, but, as always, their service was never offered without compensation. What followed was an extraordinary concession. In exchange for Venetian naval aid, the emperor issued an imperial decree known as a Golden Bull. This document transformed the position of Venice overnight. Venetian merchants were granted sweeping commercial privileges across the Byzantine Empire. In most major imperial ports, including Constantinople itself, they were permitted to trade entirely free of taxation. They were even allocated their own district within the capital, complete with docks reserved exclusively for their ships. For Venice, this was an economic triumph of historic scale. These privileges handed Venetian merchants a decisive advantage over their rivals, particularly Genoa and Pisa. While other trading powers paid heavy duties, Venetians moved their goods freely, increasing profits and expanding their reach. Wealth poured back into the lagoon, and Venetian influence across the eastern Mediterranean grew rapidly. But the success came at a hidden cost. As Venetian trade flourished, the Byzantine treasury began to suffer. The empire was deprived of vast amounts of tax revenue that had once sustained its administration and military. Slowly, the balance between servant and master shifted. The merchants of Venice were no longer junior partners within the imperial system. They were becoming richer, stronger, and more influential than the empire that had once claimed authority over them. Over the following century, resentment took root. In Constantinople, hostility toward the Venetian presence intensified. Their merchants dominated commerce, displayed their wealth openly, and operated under legal protections unavailable to locals. To many Byzantines, they appeared arrogant and untouchable. Tensions erupted repeatedly into violence. Riots and massacres targeted Venetian communities, leaving deep scars on both sides. The alliance that had once been mutually beneficial hardened into suspicion and rivalry. By the end of the 12th century, the relationship was irreparably broken. Venice was no longer a subordinate power operating under imperial favor. It now stood as an independent force, and increasingly as a competitor. The weakening Byzantine Empire came to be viewed not only as a commercial obstacle, but as an opportunity. Venetian leaders understood the extent of Constantinople's wealth. They also knew its vulnerabilities. This long history of cooperation, exploitation, and growing bitterness formed the essential background to the dramatic events that would soon follow. As Venice rose in strength and loosened its ties to its former overlord, another realization took hold. Political and economic independence required spiritual independence as well. A great power needed a great patron, a saint whose authority could rival those venerated in Rome and Constantinople. Venice's existing patron was a minor Byzantine figure, a lingering reminder of past subordination. To sever that final symbolic bond, Venice required a relic of the highest possible prestige. Their attention turned to the body of Saint Mark the Evangelist. The problem was location. Saint Mark's remains rested in a shrine in Alexandria, a city under Muslim rule. In the year 828, two Venetian merchants, Buono da Malamocco and Rustico da Torcello, undertook a daring and deeply controversial mission. Their objective was the removal of the saint's body and its transfer to Venice, an act framed as sacred duty but accomplished through deception. Arriving in Alexandria, the merchants relied on bribery and persuasion to gain access to the shrine. They claimed they were rescuing the relic from possible desecration, presenting their theft as an act of religious preservation. The most dangerous obstacle came at the port, where the body had to pass inspection by Muslim customs officials. Here, Venetian pragmatism prevailed. The remains were concealed in a large basket and covered with layers of pork and cabbage leaves. When officials approached the cargo, the presence of pork considered unclean repelled them. The shipment was waved through without further examination. The plan succeeded. When the relic reached Venice, the effect was immediate and overwhelming. The city erupted in celebration. With the arrival of Saint Mark, Venice was transformed. No longer merely a cultural offshoot of Byzantium, it became a destination of pilgrimage in its own right. Its spiritual authority could now stand alongside Rome and Constantinople. To house the evangelist's remains, a magnificent basilica was commissioned. St. Mark's Basilica became both the sacred center and the political heart of the Republic. Along with the saint came a powerful new emblem. The winged lion of Saint Mark was adopted as the symbol of Venice, stamped onto coins, flown on banners, and carved into the gates of conquered cities. The theft of the saint's body was more than a religious act. It was a declaration, a final severing of dependence, and the laying of a sacred foundation for the power Venice was becoming. The symbol of the evangelist was a winged lion, and Venice claimed it without hesitation. The Lion of Saint Mark, most often shown holding an open book, was elevated into the official emblem of the Republic. Its image spread everywhere. It was struck into coins, raised on the banners of warships, and carved into the gates and walls of cities brought under Venetian control. The removal of the saint's body was not merely an act of devotion, it was the clearest possible declaration of ambition, a sacred transgression that severed the last symbolic ties to the past and established a divine foundation for the independent power Venice was determined to become. With a stable political system and a powerful heavenly patron, the Republic now possessed something equally essential: a growing naval force. Its fleet had become strong enough to be hired even by the Byzantine emperor himself. But this raised a fundamental question: where did such maritime strength truly come from? The answer lay not in ceremony or diplomacy, but in industry. Hidden in the eastern reaches of the city, behind high red brick walls and guarded towers, stood the Venetian arsenal. It was far more than a dockyard. It was the largest and most efficient industrial complex in Europe, operating on principles centuries ahead of its time. This was the physical heart of the Republic, the place where Venetian power was forged. The genius of the arsenal rested in its method of production. In an age when ships were usually constructed individually, from start to finish, the Venetians adopted a radically different approach. They broke shipbuilding into standardized stages. Across the vast complex, specialized workshops produced interchangeable components in enormous quantities. Oars, rudders, masts, fittings, and coils of rope were manufactured by skilled workers known as the arsenalati, each group focused on a single task repeated with precision. These components were stored by the thousands in immense warehouses, ready to be deployed without delay. Ship assembly followed a carefully organized sequence. A prepared hull would enter a long production canal running through the arsenal. As it moved forward, it paused at a series of stations. At each stop, a different group of specialists descended upon it. Benches for the rowers were installed. Masts were stepped and sails rigged. In the final stages, the vessel was armed, first with crossbows and later with cannons cast in the arsenal's own foundries. The efficiency of this system became legendary. According to contemporary accounts, a visiting dignitary once watched a complete war galley built, equipped, and armed in the time it took him to finish a leisurely meal. At the height of its power, Venice could launch a fully operational warship in a single day. This speed was decisive. No rival could match the Republic's ability to mobilize. In moments of crisis, fleets appeared almost overnight, overwhelming enemies through sheer scale and rapid deployment. The arsenalati themselves formed an elite class. As employees of the state, they received lifelong security, pensions, and housing. In return, they offered absolute loyalty and strict secrecy. They were entrusted with the Republic's most vital military and industrial knowledge. The arsenal functioned as a fortress in its own right. It guarded not only against foreign attack, but against espionage from rival powers desperate to uncover the secrets of Venetian production. More than a shipyard, the arsenal was a material expression of Venetian pragmatism and ingenuity. It transformed a city built on mud and salt water into a dominant naval force. Political stability supplied direction, but industrial capacity supplied power. And, once each year, that power was revealed to the world. On the Feast of the Ascension, Venice staged its most important state ceremony. This ritual captured the essence of the Republic itself. It was known as the marriage to the sea. At its center stood the Doge's ceremonial state vessel. The ceremonial barge was known as the Bucentaur. It was nothing like a war galley. It was a floating palace, a triumph of Venetian craftsmanship created not for battle, but for display. Vast in scale and double-decked in form, it was propelled by the most skilled oarsmen the arsenal could provide. Every surface was covered in elaborate mythological carvings, each detail layered in thick sheets of gold leaf. When the vessel emerged from its sheltered dock, observers described it as a mountain of gold drifting across the water. On the morning of the festival, the Doge stepped aboard the Bucentaur. He wore his most formal ceremonial robes, accompanied by the highest officials of the Republic and visiting foreign ambassadors. From this gilded platform, he led an immense procession out into the lagoon. Hundreds of vessels followed in his wake. Gondolas and private boats, richly decorated, formed a vast floating parade. Music echoed across the water. Church bells rang from every quarter of the city. The voices of the people rose in celebration. It was a moment of collective pride when Venice presented itself to the world. The procession moved toward the Lido Inlet, the threshold where the calm waters of the lagoon meet the open Adriatic Sea. There, the movement stopped. The flotilla fell silent. At this precise point, the Doge performed the ancient rite. He lifted a consecrated golden ring and held it aloft for all to see. Then he spoke the fixed Latin vow, declaring the marriage between the city and the sea, a union meant to endure forever. With those words, he cast the ring into the waves. This act was repeated every year. It renewed the sacred bond at the core of Venetian life. It was a prayer for safe voyages and prosperous trade. But it was also an unmistakable political declaration. The ritual proclaimed that the Adriatic belonged to Venice. The sea was not simply water. It was a controlled space, a private route of commerce and power. For the Republic, this was not symbolism alone. The city had been born from the water, defended by it, and enriched through it. The sea was their field, their wall, and the foundation of their existence. To be married to the sea was to affirm the central truth of their world. This ceremony, radiant and deliberate, was the purest expression of the Venetian spirit. A golden display that revealed the true source of their strength. At the opening of the 13th century, events beyond the lagoon began to draw Venice into a far more dangerous role. Pope Innocent III proclaimed a new crusade, calling for a holy war to reclaim Jerusalem. The feudal lords of France and the Holy Roman Empire answered the call, gathering a formidable army of knights and soldiers. Yet to strike at Muslim power in Egypt, they required transport across the sea. Only one city possessed the ships and organization to accomplish such a task: Venice. At that time, the Republic was led by one of the most extraordinary figures of the Middle Ages, Doge Enrico Dandolo. He was already in extreme old age, blind and well into his 90s. Yet his intellect remained sharp, and his ambition for Venice's greatness was undiminished. When the envoys of the crusade arrived, they presented their demand. They required a fleet capable of carrying 33,000 men and 4,500 horses. Dandolo responded with calculation. Venice agreed to suspend its normal commercial operations for more than a year. The full industrial capacity of the arsenal would be devoted to constructing the Crusader fleet. But the price was immense. The Crusaders were to pay 85,000 silver marks for the service. The agreement was accepted, and Venice began its work. In the summer of 1202, the Crusader army arrived at the Lido. Almost immediately, disaster followed. The force was far smaller than promised. Many knights had chosen other routes or abandoned the campaign entirely. The money collected fell far short of the agreed sum. Venice faced a grave dilemma. A vast foreign army was now stranded in the lagoon, unable to continue its holy mission. At the same time, the Republic stood on the edge of financial ruin, its costly fleet completed but unpaid, lying idle in the harbor. It was in this moment that Doge Dandolo revealed the full extent of his cunning. He put forward a proposal. Dandolo addressed the desperate Crusaders with a calculated alternative. The remaining debt, he proposed, need not be paid in silver. It could be settled through service. Their first objective, however, would not be Egypt. Instead, he named the Christian city of Zara, a commercial rival of Venice on the Dalmatian coast. The proposal was met with shock. The Crusaders had sworn sacred vows to fight the enemies of Christ. Now they were being asked to turn their weapons against fellow Christians, not for faith, but for Venetian advantage. Outrage spread through the camp. Voices rose in protest. Some abandoned the expedition entirely, unwilling to participate in what they saw as a betrayal of their oath. Yet most could not leave. Burdened by debt and with no means to continue, they agreed, reluctantly and under pressure. To secure their compliance, Enrico Dandolo staged a masterful display of authority and devotion. During a solemn mass in St. Mark's Basilica, the aged Doge announced that he himself would take the cross. Despite his blindness and advanced age, he declared his intention to lead the crusade personally. The gesture was dramatic and decisive. It silenced opposition and bound the remaining Crusaders to the course he had chosen. The fleet, financed by Venetian silver and sustained by Crusader desperation, finally put to sea. Dandolo's gamble succeeded. The Fourth Crusade had been redirected onto a path never intended by its original purpose. Sacred ambition had been replaced by calculation. Holy war had been bent to serve Venetian interests. In the autumn of 1202, the combined Venetian and Crusader fleet appeared before the harbor of Zara. The sight was terrifying. The people of the city were devout Catholics. They displayed crucifixes and papal banners upon their walls, pleading with the approaching army not to attack fellow Christians. The Pope himself had explicitly forbidden the assault and had threatened excommunication. But debt held the Crusader leaders in place, and the blind Doge showed no hesitation. For Venice, the matter was simple. The siege commenced. After a brief and violent assault, Zara fell. The Crusader forces entered the city and sacked it, satisfying part of their obligation through destruction and plunder. It was a dark beginning, an ominous signal of what lay ahead. The army settled into the conquered city for the winter. It was during this cold and uneasy pause that the fate of the crusade shifted permanently. A new figure arrived in the camp. He was Alexios Angelos, a young Byzantine prince living in exile. His offer was extraordinary. He asked the Crusaders to sail to Constantinople and help him claim the imperial throne. In return, he promised to settle their entire debt to Venice. He would finance their continued campaign toward Egypt. He would also bring the Orthodox Church under the authority of the Pope. For the French and German knights, the proposal offered justification. They could restore a rightful ruler, reunite the Christian Church, and escape financial ruin. For Venice, the implications were even greater. Constantinople was the richest city in the world and Venice's foremost commercial rival. The prospect of placing a dependent and indebted emperor on its throne was an opportunity beyond measure. Enrico Dandolo was prepared to stake everything on it. In the summer of 1203, the Crusader fleet arrived before the immense walls of Constantinople. The citizens of the greatest Christian capital were stunned to see a Christian army gathered against them. The first assault achieved its aim. The reigning emperor fled, and Alexios Angelos was installed as co-emperor. But the victory was fragile. The new ruler soon discovered that the imperial treasury was empty. He could not deliver the vast payments he had promised. Frustration and anger spread through the Crusader camp. Resentment grew inside the city itself. A popular uprising erupted, overthrowing the new regime. The young emperor was captured and brutally killed. With no payment forthcoming, the Crusaders faced a final decision. They chose force. In April of 1204, they launched a full-scale assault. The Venetian fleet played a decisive role, its ships serving as floating siege towers that brought attackers directly onto the sea walls. After fierce fighting, the defenses collapsed. The army surged into the richest city in Christendom. What followed would become one of the darkest episodes of the medieval world. The Great Sack of Constantinople endured 3 days of unrestrained devastation. Looting spread through the city without pause. Destruction followed it, and murder came with both. Palaces were emptied. Churches were torn apart as sacred relics and ancient treasures were stripped from their sanctuaries. Knowledge itself was not spared. The great library was consumed by fire. Bronze statues of immense beauty and antiquity were pulled from their pedestals, broken down, and melted for coin. Amid the chaos, Venice acted with precision. When the spoils were divided, the French knights claimed land. Venice chose differently. It took what mattered most to a maritime power. The 4 great bronze horses were seized, destined to become a defining symbol of St. Mark's Basilica. Control was claimed over 3/8 of Constantinople itself. Beyond the city, Venice secured a chain of strategic ports and islands across the former Byzantine realm, including the critically important island of Crete. The Fourth Crusade never reached the Holy Land. Instead, it shattered the ancient Christian Byzantine Empire and flooded Venice with unprecedented wealth. With the treasures of Constantinople filling its vaults and its most vital ports now under Venetian control, the Republic crossed a threshold. It was no longer merely a powerful city-state. It had become a true empire, unrivaled in the Eastern Mediterranean. In the disorder that followed the sack, the Crusader lords from France and Germany rushed to divide the fallen empire among themselves. They carved out feudal territories and inland kingdoms from the wreckage of Byzantium. Venice did not follow them. It had no desire to rule vast, restless populations or administer feudal estates far from the sea. Its ambition lay elsewhere. From the ruins of the empire, Venice constructed a different kind of dominion, one shaped entirely by commerce. This was the Stato da Mar, the state of the sea. While others claimed territory, Venice claimed roots. It set out to build an unbroken chain of fortified ports and islands, each positioned to serve as a stepping stone for ships moving between markets. This maritime corridor stretched from the Venetian lagoon deep into the eastern Mediterranean and onward toward the Black Sea. Each link in this chain served a purpose. They were safe harbors where merchant vessels could shelter, resupply, and wait out storms or threats. They were naval bases from which warships could be deployed to protect shipping lanes. And they were trading centers where local goods were gathered and redirected toward Venice. Together, they ensured the security and dominance of Venetian commerce. From the partition of the Byzantine Empire, Venice acquired its most valuable possessions. It secured key ports along the Greek coastline and established control over the Cyclades Islands in the Aegean. Above all, it claimed Crete, known to the Venetians as the Kingdom of Candia. The island became the cornerstone of their overseas empire. Its strategic position allowed Venice to command the main shipping routes of the eastern Mediterranean. For centuries, it functioned as both a critical naval base and a steady source of wealth. This was not an empire of settlers. It was a disciplined commercial and military system. Each port and island within the Stato da Mar was selected for its strategic and economic value, not its size. Governance followed the same logic. Venetian nobles were appointed as governors, overseeing predominantly Greek populations. Their rule was pragmatic rather than transformative, focused on taxation, order, and the uninterrupted movement of trade rather than cultural change. The Stato da Mar embodied the Venetian worldview. It was an empire built by merchants, for merchants, a hardened framework of naval stations and trading posts that supported a vast commercial network. Through it, Venice directed the flow of wealth from east to west with exceptional efficiency and security. They had raised their city from the water. Now they had built their empire upon it as well. Venice had raised its city from the water, and now it had extended that logic outward, building an empire upon the sea itself. This network of ports and islands was carefully designed to channel the wealth of the East toward the markets of the West. Goods moved along routes protected by Venetian harbors, guarded by Venetian ships, and controlled by Venetian merchants. Yet one journey pushed far beyond these familiar pathways. It was undertaken by a single Venetian, whose name would become inseparable from the idea of distant worlds. Marco Polo's travels would grow into the most famous travel account of the medieval age. His story began in 1271, when he left Venice at just 17 years old, accompanied by his father and uncle. They were merchants, and their expedition was driven by trade and opportunity. The route they followed was not by sea. Instead, it was a long and punishing overland passage along the interconnected routes later known as the Silk Road. For 3.5 years, they moved steadily eastward, crossing Anatolian mountains, Persian deserts, and the towering Pamir Range, the so-called roof of the world. At last, they reached their destination, the court of Kublai Khan, the Mongol ruler of China, a place that seemed almost legendary to European imagination. The Khan proved to be a ruler of curiosity and sophistication. He was intrigued by the visitors from the far west and took a particular interest in the young Marco. He recognized in him intelligence, attentiveness, and an ability to observe the world with precision. For the next 17 years, Marco Polo remained in the service of the Khan. He was not merely a trader. He became an emissary and official within the vast Mongol Empire, traveling extensively on imperial business. In doing so, he witnessed scenes unknown to Europe. He saw cities of immense scale, far larger than any in the West. He observed the use of coal as fuel, the circulation of paper money, and the operation of a sophisticated postal system that connected distant regions. He heard accounts of lands even farther east, including the islands of Japan. After 24 years away, the Polos were finally granted permission to return. The journey home was no less dangerous. This time, they traveled by sea, crossing the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean before making their way back toward the Mediterranean. When they reached Venice in 1295, they were scarcely recognizable, dressed in worn clothing from the Mongol world. According to tradition, their own relatives doubted their identity. To prove the truth of their story, they cut open the seams of their garments, releasing a cascade of precious jewels, rubies, sapphires, and diamonds hidden there to protect them from thieves. Marco Polo's tale, however, did not end in triumph. Only a few years after his return, Venice was again at war with its long-standing rival, Genoa. Marco, now a wealthy man, commanded his own galley in the Venetian fleet. In 1298, at the Battle of Curzola, Venice suffered defeat. Marco Polo was captured and imprisoned in Genoa. It was there, inside a prison cell, that his journey took its final form. To pass the time, Marco dictated the full account of his travels to a fellow prisoner, a writer of romances named Rustichello of Pisa. The resulting work, later known as The Travels of Marco Polo, spread rapidly across Europe. Many readers dismissed it as fantasy, calling it The Million Lies. Yet it was the most detailed and realistic description of the Far East the West had ever encountered. Its influence endured. The book inspired generations of explorers and shaped European imagination for centuries, including that of Christopher Columbus. It permanently secured the legacy of a Venetian merchant who had traveled farther than any of his contemporaries and returned to tell the tale. Venice had built an empire, and its merchants had reached the edges of the known world. But one great contest remained unresolved. Across the Italian peninsula stood Genoa, Venice's equal and opposite, its rival upon the sea. To determine which city would command the Mediterranean, one final and brutal conflict was required. This was the War of Chioggia, the last and most desperate struggle between the two maritime powers. The war began in 1378. In a daring and unprecedented move, the Genoese fleet achieved what no enemy had ever done before. It forced its way into the Venetian lagoon, smashed through the outer defenses, and seized the strategic port of Chioggia at the lagoon's southern entrance. For the first time in its history, Venice itself stood directly threatened, its own waterways occupied by a hostile force. This was the Republic's darkest hour. The threat now pressed directly against the city itself. Enemy ships stood at the entrances of the lagoon, and the Genoese fleet imposed a tight blockade, severing Venice from the sea that sustained it. With maritime access cut off, supplies dwindled rapidly. Hunger spread through the city as food failed to arrive, and the wealth that once flowed so freely now stood frozen behind enemy hulls. Confident of victory, the Genoese admiral sent a message to the Venetian Doge. Peace, he declared, would only come once the Lion of Streetmark had been subdued. It was a promise of complete domination. Faced with ruin, Venice responded not with surrender, but with resolve. Every remaining ship was gathered. Every available sailor was summoned. In an act born of desperation, the Republic released its most capable naval commander, Vettor Pisani, from imprisonment and placed him back in command. His proposal was daring to the point of recklessness. Instead of breaking the blockade, Venice would reverse it. Under the cover of darkness, the Venetian fleet moved southward through familiar waters. They reached the narrow channels that formed the sole exit from the Chioggia lagoon, the only route by which the Genoese fleet could escape. There, they carried out their plan. Old vessels, stripped of value and packed with stone, were deliberately sunk across the passages. One by one, the exits were sealed. In a single night, the balance of power shifted. The fleet that had just claimed victory found itself trapped within the harbor it had conquered. The siege of Venice became the siege of Chioggia. Roles were reversed, and the hunters became the hunted. For 6 relentless months, the Venetians held their position. Supplies were denied. Food failed to arrive. No relief came from the outside. What followed was not a clash of fleets, but a slow and merciless contest of endurance. Starvation weakened the trapped Genoese crews, and hope steadily drained away. At last, with no possibility of rescue and no provisions left, the once dominant Genoese fleet surrendered completely. The outcome was decisive. The War of Chioggia shattered Genoa's naval power beyond recovery. Though the city would continue to exist as a financial center, its bid for control of the seas had ended. Venice emerged alone, unrivaled in maritime trade, having defeated its greatest competitor in a conflict it had nearly lost. The Republic stood ready to enter its age of greatest prosperity. With its sea lanes secure and its rivals broken, Venice became the uncontested master of the Mediterranean. Its network of ports and islands functioned as a single, finely tuned system, created for one overriding purpose: control of the most valuable trade known to Europe. In the medieval and Renaissance world, true wealth was not measured solely in gold. It was measured in spice. Pepper, cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg carried extraordinary value. They preserved food, formed the basis of medicines, and served as unmistakable symbols of status. Their distant origins in the eastern Spice Islands were largely unknown, adding an aura of mystery to their worth. A small sack of peppercorns could equal a lifetime of labor. Nutmeg was sometimes valued more highly than gold itself. For generations, Venice positioned itself as the sole intermediary between these riches and Europe. The journey of the spices was long and hazardous. Arab and Indian sailors transported them across the Indian Ocean. Camel caravans carried them through the deserts of Arabia. At last, they reached the Mediterranean ports of Alexandria and Aleppo. There, at the threshold of Europe, Venetian merchants stood ready. Through carefully negotiated agreements with Egyptian sultans, the strength of their navy, and the protection offered by their island bases, Venice secured an effective monopoly. No other European power could purchase spices at the source on equal terms. At the center of this system was the Venetian merchant galley. These large, primarily sail-driven vessels traveled in guarded convoys. They arrived in Alexandria carrying European goods, such as Flemish wool and German iron. In return, they loaded their holds with the precious cargo of the East. The voyage home was a return of triumph, the ships heavy with fragrant wealth that formed the foundation of the Republic's fortune. When a spice fleet returned to Venice, the entire city responded. Cargo was unloaded at the bustling markets of the Rialto. The air filled with unfamiliar scents, rich and exotic. Under the supervision of state officials, each sack was weighed, taxed, and sold, ensuring that the profits of empire flowed steadily into Venetian hands. Under the supervision of state officials, every shipment was carefully handled. Each sack of pepper was measured, assessed, and sold to the merchant houses of the city. From Venice's vast warehouses, these prized goods were then sent onward across the continent, reaching markets far beyond the lagoon. The profits generated by this tightly controlled system were immense. That wealth reshaped the city. It financed the construction of grand marble palaces along the Grand Canal. It supported the creation of extraordinary works of art by masters such as Titian and Veronese. It paid for the powerful war fleets launched from the arsenal. Venice, gleaming upon the water, became a city quite literally built upon spice. At this moment, the Republic stood at the height of its prosperity. Its maritime empire functioned as a conduit, drawing the riches of the East directly into Venetian coffers. Yet the very success that had elevated Venice also exposed a new and serious weakness. For centuries, danger had approached only by sea, a domain the Venetians understood and controlled. Now a different threat was emerging, much closer to home. On the Italian mainland, powerful and aggressive states were consolidating their strength. Foremost among them was the Duchy of Milan, ruled by the ambitious Visconti family, whose aim was the domination of northern Italy. Venetian leaders began to recognize an unsettling truth. The lagoon was no longer an absolute shield. An enemy holding the surrounding land could choke off food supplies and sever the vital overland trade routes that connected Venice to Europe beyond the Alps. The sea had enriched the Republic, but control of the land could starve it. This realization ignited a bitter debate within the Doge's palace. One group, the traditionalists, argued that Venice was fundamentally a maritime power. They warned that entanglement in the dangerous and costly land wars of Italy would betray the city's true identity. The opposing faction, the expansionists, insisted that neutrality was no longer an option. Security, they argued, required dominance over the surrounding mainland and the creation of a protective buffer zone. After years of contention, the expansionist view prevailed. In the early 15th century, under the leadership of Doge Francesco Foscari, Venice altered its grand strategy. The Republic embarked on a prolonged and expensive campaign to conquer territory inland. This marked the beginning of the Stato di Terra, the land-based state. Initial successes came quickly. Through a combination of diplomacy and military force, Venetian armies seized Padua, then Vicenza, and eventually the strategically important city of Verona. These gains placed the major rivers and fertile farmlands of the Veneto under Venetian control. For the first time, the Republic secured its own agricultural base. The transformation was profound. Venice was no longer solely a maritime empire. It had become a major land power within Italy. This expansion brought greater security and new resources, but it also bound the Republic to decades of costly and complex warfare. These conflicts bore little resemblance to the naval engagements Venice had mastered and required an entirely different kind of soldier. Here, the Republic confronted a fundamental limitation. Venetian citizens were sailors, merchants, and shipbuilders, not professional infantry or cavalry. To fight prolonged land campaigns, Venice turned, like other Italian states, to the specialists of Renaissance warfare, the condottieri. A condottiero was a mercenary commander who fought not for loyalty or ideology, but under contract. That agreement specified his pay, the size of the force he would supply, and the length of service. These men operated as military entrepreneurs, commanding private armies composed of armored horsemen and infantry. Many were lesser nobles, who viewed war as a means to wealth, prestige, and advancement. This system shaped a distinct style of warfare. Battles were calculated enterprises. A condottiero's greatest assets were his trained soldiers and costly war horses. Risking them in decisive engagements threatened his livelihood. As a result, campaigns often unfolded through maneuver, siege, and negotiation rather than outright destruction. Decisive battles that could annihilate an army were avoided whenever possible. Such losses threatened not only victory, but a commander's entire livelihood. As a result, warfare on the Italian mainland often unfolded as a slow and calculated contest. Campaigns revolved around maneuver, prolonged sieges, and carefully chosen skirmishes. The objective was not destruction, but advantage. Territory was to be taken with minimal risk. In this world, loyalty was fluid. A mercenary captain might change sides if a rival power offered better terms. Contracts could shift, alliances could dissolve, and yesterday's ally could become tomorrow's enemy. The Venetians understood this reality. They relied on condottieri because they had no alternative, but they never fully trusted them. Their deepest fear was political, not military. A successful and popular general could command the loyalty of his troops. With an army behind him, he might seize power and overturn the Republic. To prevent this, Venice subjected its commanders to constant scrutiny. Civil officials were embedded with armies in the field, tasked with observing every decision and reporting directly to the Council of Ten. The most infamous example of this mistrust was the fate of Francesco Busoni, known as Carmagnola. He was a gifted commander, originally employed by Milan, Venice's greatest rival on land. The Republic lured him away with a lucrative contract, and for a time, the decision seemed justified. Carmagnola delivered important victories and became widely celebrated. Yet success bred suspicion. When his later campaigns appeared cautious and inconclusive, doubts emerged. Venetian authorities began to suspect secret communications with his former masters in Milan. In 1432, the state moved without hesitation. Carmagnola was summoned back to Venice under the pretense of discussing future strategy. He was received with ceremony and honor at the Doge's palace, but as he stepped into a side chamber, the doors were closed behind him. On orders from the Council of Ten, he was arrested. A secret trial followed. Accused of treason, he was found guilty. He was then led into the Piazzetta of San Marco, between the two great columns, and publicly executed by beheading. The message was unmistakable. Venice would employ mercenary generals to build and defend its land empire, but it would never allow them to forget who held ultimate authority. This was the harsh and suspicious reality of Renaissance land warfare. It was the cost the Republic paid to establish and protect its Stato di Terra, its dominion on land. Yet Venice was a city of contrasts. While hired armies fought grim campaigns across dusty plains, the city they defended was being reshaped by wealth flowing steadily from the east. This fortune did more than finance wars. It created a distinctive way of life, refined and opulent, unlike anywhere else in Europe. The great spice convoys brought extraordinary riches into the city. These profits transformed Venice's architecture and art, but they also shaped daily existence along its waterways. And no object was more closely tied to Venetian life than its most iconic vessel, the gondola. For centuries, canals served as Venice's streets. Movement of all kinds depended on boats. Over time, the gondola evolved into the ideal craft for this environment. Its form reflected careful refinement. Long and narrow, it could pass through the tightest canals. Its flat bottom allowed it to glide over shallow water. Most ingenious of all, its hull was built asymmetrically, curved just enough to counterbalance the force of a single oar. This design allowed one gondolier, standing at the stern, to propel the boat in a straight line using a single stroke. The gondoliers themselves occupied a respected place in Venetian society. They belonged to a tightly regulated guild with deep historical roots. They navigated the city's maze of canals with unmatched knowledge. They served as transporters, confidants, and silent witnesses to the private lives of the city's elite. During the height of the Renaissance, the gondola became a symbol of status. Noble families competed to own the most elaborate vessels. Gondolas were decorated with vivid fabrics, ornate carvings, and generous amounts of gold leaf. The canals filled with floating displays of private wealth, an indulgence that clashed with the Republic's ideal of public restraint. Eventually, the state intervened. In 1562, the Venetian government enacted a sumptuary law. The law was designed to restrain excess. It ordered that all gondolas, except for a small number of ceremonial state vessels, be stripped of decoration and painted a single, uniform black. With one decree, ornamentation vanished from the canals. What remained was simplicity, imposed by law. This decision captured the Venetian mindset perfectly. Outwardly, the Republic projected restraint and equality. Beneath that surface lay immense private wealth, carefully concealed behind enforced uniformity. The black gondola became an enduring symbol of the city itself. It represented a culture that masked luxury behind discipline, a society that demanded public modesty while tolerating private splendor. That the state could dictate even the color of a boat revealed the extent of its authority. Venice exercised control not only over institutions, but over daily life. And this impulse toward regulation did not stop at commerce or appearance. It extended into the most sensitive and dangerous domain of all, belief. Across Renaissance Europe, the Catholic Church wielded a powerful instrument to defend doctrine. The Inquisition functioned as a special court charged with identifying and punishing heresy, beliefs deemed incompatible with official teaching. Venice, however, refused to surrender this power entirely to Rome. Though deeply Catholic, the Republic insisted on maintaining its own state-controlled Inquisition. The reasoning was practical rather than theological. Venice was a city built on international exchange. Its streets and warehouses were filled with foreign merchants, German Lutherans, Orthodox Greeks, and Jewish communities all played essential roles in the city's economy. An aggressive, Rome-directed Inquisition risked provoking diplomatic crises and disrupting the trade relationships upon which Venice depended. For the Republic, commercial stability mattered as much as religious conformity. The Venetian system reflected this balance. The tribunal itself was composed of church officials, including the papal nuncio and the Patriarch of Venice. Yet a critical safeguard was imposed. 3 lay observers, Venetian nobles appointed by the state and known as the Savi o Eresia, were required to attend every proceeding. They did not cast votes on verdicts. Their role was oversight. Their presence ensured that trials remained aligned with the interests of the Republic. If proceedings threatened political stability or economic relationships, intervention was possible. In this way, the state retained ultimate control. As a result, the Venetian Inquisition earned a reputation for restraint. Compared to its counterparts in Spain or Rome, it was generally less violent and more pragmatic. Its emphasis lay on public repentance and conformity rather than widespread executions. While prosecutions did occur, severity was moderated by the Republic's overriding concern for order. Particular attention was paid to the large German merchant population. Venetian authorities feared that the spread of Protestant ideas could evolve into political unrest. Religious deviation was treated not only as a matter of faith, but as a question of civic stability. This independence inevitably brought Venice into conflict with the papacy. Rome viewed the Republic's insistence on a state-controlled Inquisition as a challenge to papal authority. Yet, this was consistent with a broader Venetian pattern. Again and again, the Republic placed its own interests above external demands, even those of the Church. Among Italian states, this stance was unusual. The Venetian Inquisition exemplified the city's unique character. Venice managed to remain devout while fiercely autonomous. It balanced belief with governance, faith with commerce, even in matters as grave as heresy. Final allegiance lay not with Rome, but with the stability of the Republic itself. Yet that stability, so carefully defended from within, now faced a threat unlike any before. Venice's age of commercial dominance was not destined to endure unchanged. During the 15th and 16th centuries, a powerful new force rose in the east. The Ottoman Empire expanded relentlessly. When Constantinople fell to the Sultan in 1453, The shock reverberated through Venice. Control of the vital routes to the Black Sea passed into hostile hands. What followed was a century of exhausting conflict. One by one, Venice's prized ports and Venice's island holdings in the Aegean now came under sustained assault. The Republic found itself locked in an endless and ruinously expensive struggle to defend its maritime empire against the expanding power of the Ottomans. Year after year, resources were drained to hold ports, fortresses, and sea lanes that had once seemed secure. The pressure reached its breaking point in 1570. That year, Ottoman forces launched a massive invasion of Cyprus, one of Venice's richest and most strategically vital possessions. The scale of the attack made the reality unmistakable. Venice could no longer confront the full strength of the Ottoman navy alone. Desperate appeals were sent across Europe, calling for a new crusade. The response was unprecedented. A Holy League was formed, uniting Christian powers that often stood divided. Spain, the Papal States, and several Italian principalities joined their fleets with Venice. Together, they prepared to face the Ottoman threat at sea. What followed would become the largest naval engagement fought in the Western world since antiquity. In the autumn of 1571, the opposing fleets met in the Gulf of Patras, off the coast of Greece, in what would be remembered as the Battle of Lepanto. The scale of the confrontation was extraordinary. More than 200 Ottoman galleys advanced in formation, their oars driving them forward in unison. Opposite them stood a Christian fleet of comparable size, its masts and banners forming a dense wall across the horizon. This would be the final great battle dominated by oar-powered warships. At the core of the Venetian contingent were 6 revolutionary vessels known as galleasses. Taller and broader than traditional galleys, these hybrid ships carried heavy artillery in unprecedented numbers. They functioned as floating fortresses designed to unleash devastating firepower. As the battle commenced, the galleasses were towed ahead of the main Christian line. When the Ottoman fleet closed in, they opened fire. The impact was catastrophic. Cannon barrages tore through the advancing formations, shattering cohesion before the main fleets even collided. What followed was chaos. For hours, the battle raged at close quarters. Ships rammed one another, hulls locked together. Cannon fire thundered across the water. Fighting spilled onto decks slick with blood, where soldiers grappled hand to hand in desperate struggles. Slowly, the balance shifted. The superior firepower of the Christian fleet began to tell. Venetian and Spanish troops boarded the Ottoman flagship. After a fierce confrontation, the vessel was captured and the Ottoman admiral killed. When his banner fell, panic spread through the Ottoman ranks. Order collapsed. The battle dissolved into a rout. The victory at Lepanto was total. The Ottoman fleet was destroyed. Thousands of Christian galley slaves were freed from their chains. Across Europe, news of the triumph sparked celebrations of immense intensity. For Venice, it was a moment of profound pride, the last great heroic victory of the Republic on the world stage. Yet the triumph did not endure. The Holy League soon fractured under the weight of political rivalries. Left isolated once more, Venice was forced to negotiate. In the end, the Republic ceded Cyprus to the Ottomans. Lepanto had been a magnificent military success, but it could not reverse the deeper forces shaping the future. The true danger facing Venice did not sail under Ottoman banners. It emerged instead from a changing world map, redrawn by explorers sailing under the flag of a rival power. At the close of the 15th century, Venetian wealth still rested on its control of the spice trade. Pepper, cinnamon, and other precious goods passed through Venetian hands, and Europe paid dearly for access. But elsewhere, a different strategy was unfolding. For decades, the Kingdom of Portugal had invested in an alternative route. Under the influence of figures such as Prince Henry the Navigator, Portuguese expeditions pushed steadily down the uncharted coast of Africa. New types of ships were developed, including the caravel, built to survive the violent conditions of the Atlantic Ocean. The objective was singular. Portugal sought a direct sea passage to the Indies, one that would bypass Venetian intermediaries entirely. In 1488, Bartolomé Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope, proving that the Indian Ocean could be reached from the Atlantic. The barrier that had protected Venice's monopoly was breached. A decade later, in the summer of 1497, a Portuguese captain named Vasco da Gama departed Lisbon with 4 small ships to complete the journey. The voyage became a test of endurance. Violent storms battered the ships in the open Atlantic. Disease spread, and scurvy claimed many lives. Along the African coast, hostile traders resisted the Portuguese intrusion, seeing the newcomers as dangerous competitors. Yet, the expedition pressed on. After 10 exhausting months at sea, the battered fleet finally reached its destination. In May of 1498, the ships dropped anchor in the port of Calicut on the coast of India. The impossible had been achieved. For the first time in history, a European navigator had reached India by sailing directly from Europe. The implications were enormous, but news traveled slowly. At first, it circulated as rumor in distant markets. Then, it appeared as alarming confirmation in diplomatic correspondence. When the truth finally reached Venice, the reaction was one of shock. A Venetian diarist recorded it as the worst news the Republic could have received. The city's most perceptive merchants immediately grasped the consequences. Venice's economic system, refined over centuries, had been rendered obsolete. Portuguese ships could now carry spices directly to Lisbon at a fraction of the cost. The monopoly that had sustained Venetian wealth was broken. The Republic did not yield without resistance. Venice attempted diplomacy, seeking alliances with the Sultan of Egypt in hopes of confronting Portuguese power in the Indian Ocean. It even considered one of the most daring engineering proposals of the age: the construction of a canal at Suez that would allow Venetian fleets to reach the Red Sea. But these ideas came too late. The transformation was irreversible. Venice had not been defeated in battle. It had been bypassed. The center of global commerce was shifting away from the Mediterranean toward the open Atlantic. The great age of discovery, which expanded the world, also undermined the foundations of Venetian supremacy. The city's immense wealth began a slow and inevitable decline. Yet Venice did not collapse. Instead, confronted with a world that no longer depended on it as a marketplace, the Republic embarked on a final and extraordinary transformation. If it could no longer be the most powerful city on earth, it would become the most beautiful, the most alluring, and the most entertaining. As political influence faded during the 17th and 18th centuries, cultural influence flourished. Venice became a central destination of the Grand Tour, the educational journey undertaken by wealthy young men from across Europe, particularly Britain. They did not come seeking commercial dominance. They came for art, music, and a reputation for refined indulgence and freedom. The city became their stage. This new identity found its fullest expression in the Carnival of Venice. It was not a brief celebration, but a season that lasted for months. Masquerade balls and public festivities filled the streets and squares. At the heart of it all was the mask. Behind its simple surface, social distinctions dissolved. Nobles and commoners mingled freely. Hierarchies blurred. Anonymity fostered intrigue. romance, and transgression within the city's winding alleys. Venice became the capital of pleasure. The Republic opened the first public and legal gambling house in the Western world, the Ridotto. There, under state supervision, masked aristocrats and wealthy visitors wagered vast sums in tense games of chance. This era also saw the prominence of Venetian courtesans, women renowned for education and cultural sophistication, celebrated in poetry and art. Opera flourished as well. Public theaters drew the finest singers and composers, making Venice the birthplace of a new musical tradition. This period marked a final brilliant flowering of Venetian culture. The city became synonymous with music and art. Composers such as Antonio Vivaldi filled it with sound. His energetic concertos, many written for the all-female orchestra of the city's orphanage, came to define the spirit of the age. At the same time, painters like Canaletto captured Venice in luminous detail, portraying the Grand Canal and its architecture bathed in sunlight. These images fixed the city in memory. Venice, though no longer commanding the world's trade, had transformed itself into something enduring, a living work of art, preserved in music, painting, and spectacle. It secured a different kind of immortality, one not measured in fleets or spices, but in beauty and imagination. Paintings of the Grand Canal and Street Marks Square became the most coveted keepsakes of the Grand Tour. Their precision and atmosphere were so powerful that they fixed Venice in the global imagination. For generations, the world learned how to see the city through those images. As the 18th century approached its end, Venice stood at a strange crossroads. It was still astonishingly beautiful, admired and celebrated, yet politically frozen in time. The Republic had become a kind of living exhibit. Pleasure, art, and ceremony flourished, but the structures of power beneath them had grown rigid. The navy that once ruled the seas was diminished. The ancient oligarchic system, unchanged for centuries, was no longer suited to a world on the verge of violent transformation. That transformation arrived in the form of revolution. The French Revolution unleashed a new kind of force across Europe, and its most effective weapon was a young and merciless general named Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1796, his armies surged into northern Italy, sweeping aside the old Austrian order with stunning speed. Venice, faithful to its long tradition of neutrality, attempted to remain apart from the conflict. But this was no longer an era in which neutrality offered protection. Napoleon accused the Republic of secret hostility toward France. He advanced his troops to the edge of the lagoon. For the first time in more than 1,000 years, a hostile army stood at Venice's threshold. An ultimatum followed. The Doge and the Great Council were ordered to dissolve their ancient government and replace it with a democratic regime aligned with France. Refusal would bring annihilation. The choice was brutally simple: submission or destruction. Inside the Doge's palace, the ruling families gathered for a final debate. Fear was visible on their faces. They understood their position with painful clarity. Venice's small forces could not stand against Napoleon's seasoned soldiers. The city, open to artillery from the shore, could not be defended. A final stand would mean devastation, fire, and looting. Surrender offered humiliation, but also survival. On the 12th of May, 1797, the last Doge of Venice, Ludovico Manin, addressed the council. His voice broke as he spoke. He declared that the Republic had reached its end and urged acceptance of the French terms. As voting began, distant musket fire echoed outside. Panic swept through the chamber. Fearing that violence had already begun, the nobles voted in confusion and haste. The Republic of Venice did not fall in battle. It collapsed in silence. The end came without heroics, marked instead by quiet despair. Ludovico Manin returned to his private rooms. He removed the ducal cap and handed it to a servant, saying only that he would no longer need it. Soon after, French troops marched into Streetmark Square. For the first time, the city was occupied by a foreign army. Its treasures were seized. The 4 great bronze horses were taken from the basilica and sent to Paris. The golden ceremonial barge was dismantled and burned for its metal. In 1797, the 1,000-year-old Republic of Venice ceased to exist. The power that had once commanded seas and empires was gone. In the years that followed, the city itself became a possession, passed between French and Austrian rule, until it was finally absorbed into a unified Italy in 1866. The state had vanished, but Venice endured. Its legacy no longer lay in fleets or colonies. It survived in ideas, systems, and language. As early architects of global commerce and finance, the Venetians shaped practices that still define the modern world. Even the word bank traces its origin to the simple bench used by merchants in Venetian squares, where deals were made and fortunes calculated. The Republic had fallen, but its influence remained woven into the foundations of modern life. Many of the tools of modern commerce were refined within the counting houses of Venice. Concepts such as debit and credit took their practical form in the meticulous ledgers of its merchants. Even the word quarantine traces its origin to Venetian public health policy, a system that required arriving ships to remain isolated for 40 giorni, 40 days, a safeguard developed in response to the repeated outbreaks of plague carried by global trade. Yet, the most immediate and enduring legacy of Venice is the city itself. To walk its streets today is to move through a living archive. Standing in Streetmark Square places you in what was once the ceremonial heart of the Republic, framed by the shimmering Byzantine mosaics of street. Mark's Basilica and the Doge's Palace, where 1,000 years of governance unfolded. From the palace, the Bridge of Sighs still leads toward the dark state prisons. Nearby, the red brick walls of the arsenal remain, silent reminders of the thousands of workers who once launched entire fleets in a single day. At the Rialto Bridge, the former commercial core of the empire, stone and water still mark the rhythms of trade. Venice is a city where every structure carries memory. To fully grasp the scale of Venetian power, however, one must look beyond the lagoon. Across the Mediterranean, the Lion of Streetmark is carved into walls and gates, marking the reach of a former empire. At the eastern edge of Venetian influence, the massive fortifications of Nicosia on Cyprus once stood as the final outpost. From there, the true center of Venetian maritime strength lay in Crete, the most prized overseas possession of the Republic. In the port of Chania, the harbor itself is a Venetian creation. In Heraklion, immense walls and coastal fortresses testify to centuries of defense devoted to protecting this vital colony. Closer to Venice, the island of Corfu guarded the entrance to the Adriatic, its layered fortresses still dominating the cityscape. Along the eastern Adriatic coast, in modern Croatia and Montenegro, the fortified towns of Kotor and Zadar reveal how thoroughly Venice controlled this shoreline. These maritime defenses, stretching across seas and centuries, are now preserved as part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site, known as the Venetian Works of Defense. The same designation also honors Venice's landward fortifications. On the mainland, the imposing walls of Bergamo still encircle the historic upper city. At Peschiera del Garda, an island fortress rises from the waters of the lake. Farther east, Palmanova stands as a near-perfect geometric form, a nine-pointed star conceived as an ideal military city. Together, these structures reflect a republic that learned to defend itself on both water and land. These places are more than destinations. They are the enduring physical traces of a city that once shaped the Mediterranean world. In the end, Venice's greatest inheritance is not territory or fleets, but its story. A community born from fear, settling in a landscape without natural advantages, built power through discipline, stability, and an unyielding focus on the sea. The Lion of Street. Mark no longer commands an empire, but the spirit of the city raised from water endures. The most serene republic is gone, yet the idea of Venice remains, a lasting testament to resilience, ingenuity, and ambition. And with that, our journey through the history of Venice comes to an end. Thank you for listening, and until our next passage into the past, may your night be calm and untroubled. Venice is gone as a power, but not as an idea, an impossible city whose legacy still floats upon the water.